I'd like to open with a description about an advert put out about a year ago by Dove. It's called Reverse Selfie. It starts with a young girl looking at her phone. On that phone there's a picture of her. She may be late teens, early 20s. Starts to scroll backwards. She sees the comments underneath suddenly disappearing, of all the likes going away, and "you look amazing" disappearing. Suddenly the filter changes, her hair colour changes, the size of her face, her nose, the blemishes on her skin all suddenly reappear. Actually, it goes further. She puts the phone down and lies backwards, and there's a picture of her family that she's scrubbed out off the back of the wall and her favourite teen band. Furthermore, the image shows her makeup coming off, her lipstick coming off. And finally, what's left in front of us is a girl no older than 13 or 14. And the advert then finishes with, "The pressure of social media is hurting our girls' self-esteem." If you have a chance, it's only a minute long. I'd encourage you to look at that advert because I think it encapsulates perfectly the kind of world that we are now existing in. And the problem's getting worse. Over the next few minutes, I'd like to set out 3 points to address when it comes to debating this issue of body image and what the government can do. First of all, the scale of the problem. Second of all, why it matters. And third, and most importantly, what we can do about it. Now, there are so many figures out there, but I'm going to quickly whittle through the scale of the problem that we are dealing with. So, evidence from the Girls' Guide shows that 2 in 5 girls between the age of 11 to 16 have seen images online making them feel insecure or less confident about themselves, rising to 50% for those who are 17 to 21. 55% of girls aged between 11 to 21 say images make them feel insecure about showing an unattainable wealthy lifestyle, expensive clothes or body image. 94% of girls between the age of 11 to 21 agree more should be done to protect them from the pressures of body image online. 90% of girls agree that stricter rules should be in place on advertisers when it comes to online. The Women Inequality Select Committee heard that over 6 in every 10 women feel negative about their bodies, factors including diet, culture, being bombarded with images of photoshopped and edited, sexualised women has negative impacts. But it's not just women, it's men as well. 35% of men aged between the age of 16 and 40 say they are unhappy with how they look. 48% say they've struggled with their mental health because of unhappiness. And 2 in every 5 men feel pressure to have the perfect body. It goes further. Work from the Mental Health Foundation found that 85% of under 18s thought the appearance was either very important or important. But that led on to 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 3 teenagers feeling actual shame about the way they felt. Now, the Women Inequalities report said that some of the triggers were social media, stereotypes, and, of course, conventional media. That's just some of the survey coming back. And it gives you a flavour of what people are feeling like in this country. But why does this actually matter? Well, let's take the worst case scenario. I've seen, as a clinician in my clinics, men, more and more men, but also women coming in who are concerned about their body image and at worst suffer with eating disorders. And we know there are 1.25 million people who suffer with anorexia or bulimia. But on the male side, we know that there are 1 million people, particularly men, who are using steroids to bulk up, to try and get that stereotypical big shoulders or tight abs. And this was brought home with the evidence when UCAD, the UK Anti-Doping, saw my campaign about body image and came to me saying how much of a problem it's causing them, because they're finding people are using aesthetically enhancing drugs and turning up playing on the rugby field, for example, and then being banned from the sport. We know when it comes to eating disorders, there's been a 50% increase in people accessing the services since 2016 to 2017. So we're seeing the worst extremes, but the thin end of the wedge. Combine those factors with what we've just talked about, the way the nation is feeling, and there's an obvious concern. And it matters because I don't believe social media companies are doing enough. Many have filters, many have educational content in there, and many have ways of trying to filter out some of the problems they're facing. But fundamentally, we need to go further because the problem is getting worse. And it's young people who bear the brunt of this. Now, other countries have started to make strides in this direction. Most noticeably, Israel, France, and even more recently, Norway have said they will look at labelling digitally altered images. So there is a precedent, not only here, but across the Western world, to make a difference. So what can we do? Well, I'm completely aware that the Minister in front of me today is here from DCMS, and that this is not a one single hit that you could make a difference on, because there is a chain. It comes from parental responsibility. It comes from educating our children to be aware of the content they're looking at. But of course, when people do go onto that platform, they need to be able to have the tools to be able to protect themselves. The platform needs to have a responsibility of due care on the people using their platform. And of course, if things are going wrong, a regulator backed up by legal statute to be able to deal with that. So for the purpose of this debate, I'm going to concentrate on 3 solutions that I think could make a difference. It was last year that I proposed the first one, which is labelling of digitally altered images. It's a very simple process. We already had a precedent for it with product plea, with a placement on paid advertising on TV. For me, this draws in line from the health aspect, the parity we have with labelling calories and content in food. This brings in the mental health parity of saying all the image is not quite as it seems. When we talk about advertising, we already have a precedent as well, with the likes of video games saying this isn't actual video footage, and of course political advertising labelled as such. I often use the example when people say, well, what does this mean? If you went to sell your house or rent a room, it's absolutely justifiable to paint the walls, put in a new throw, change the lighting. But fundamentally, what you can't do is digitally alter the size of the garden, the roof, the space that you're living in. And that's what I'm asking the government to take a look at. Because what we're creating is a warped sense of reality that drives young people to believe that they can be something that they can never achieve. I'm all for aspiration and improving your aesthetics. I'm a GP by trade, and healthy, promotional sport, exercise, and taking care of your body is welcome, but not at the cost if you can never achieve your goal. Now, critics of this position often turn around and say, well, hang on a second, isn't this the nanny state? Well, I would say to them, well, actually, no, it isn't, because a perfect market needs perfect information. Others say, well, practically, how does this work? And the online space already differentiates between organic and commercial activity by the size of their followers and what they're using in their content, and held them to a different category of rules. So I am not asking for the bride who's got a blemish to suddenly be punished or banned from dealing with that. What I'm asking for is that digitally altered images where the biceps are made bigger and promoted online, or indeed in magazines, should simply carry a label. But of course, that's my wish as a backbencher. In front of us, we have the online harms bill, and I credit the government for grabbing the bull by the horns and putting in a world-leading attempt to try and deal with some of the perils of the internet. That's really important. But of course, there are some difficulties here over how do we decide what goes in, how do we build a framework, and where does the responsibility lie? I'm pleased that there is a framework there that covers these companies with a duty of responsibility. Of course, what I'm talking about is not illegal. That mires it in a more difficult way of interpreting what is actually detrimental. Because an individual picture by itself may not be. The problem is when you're bombarded by 100 pictures of people with abs and shoulders the size of a fridge, that's when we start to have a problem. But I do see a solution to this, and quoting the bill, if I turn to particularly Section 46, the meaning of content is harmful to adults. It goes on to say at point 3, content within the subsection, if the provider of the service has reasonable grounds to believe that the nature of the content is such that there is material risk of content having or indirectly having a significant adverse or psychological impact on the adult of ordinary sensibilities. Now, roughly the same wording is in place for children too. So I put it to the government that actually body image could well be a legal but harmful issue and should be in the priority harms when it comes to dealing with this. But as I've pointed out, the online harms tries to cover a whole load of things that aren't related to body image. And what is at the thrust of the issue we have, and my final point and plea to government, is that actually what this all transpires down to is the algorithms that drive the content. I'm interested in fitness. I follow CrossFit, for example, on my Instagram. If I log into my Instagram account, there are hundreds of pictures sent to me of gents with their tops off who are training harder than ever before. In itself, it is not an issue having the one image, but hundreds of images driven to people is the real difficulty. Now, when I've raised this with all the big social media companies, you ask them, well, how does the algorithm work? First thing you hear is, well, that's commercially sensitive. And herein lies the problem. Because if we don't know what the algorithm is driving to people, or we don't understand it or have any clarity behind it, how can we address the problem in the first place? I am so pleased to see that Ofcom are in the line to be able to deal with this. I've had meetings with Ofcom to see that they have not only the resources, the legal backing, but also the ability to punish companies and demand companies to open up their algorithms and demand papers from them, so we can actually get to the bottom of this. I'd be grateful if the Minister would confirm that this is indeed the intent, and whether or not algorithms would be a further place in the online harms bill, because I think, while I've come to this from body image, it would help to deal with all sorts of other issues, be it scams or fraud scams, or indeed self-harm or suicide. I hope in the last 10 minutes I've demonstrated the scale of the problem, why it matters because it is the most vulnerable young people that we're facing with, and some of the solutions that are there to be able to deal with it. I look forward to the future when the Online Harm Safety Bill comes forward. I'm aware of the ASA having their call for evidence about body image. And the government may know that I've launched a petition called #RecogniseBodyImage to make sure that body image for the first time is recognised in UK law. I hope this might just make a slight bit of difference for that young girl or young boy who enjoys spending their time on social media.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered government action on body image in the media and online. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Dowd. It's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I think we used to appear opposite each other on occasion, so it's nice to be serving under your chairmanship now. And can I start by congratulating the honourable member for Bosworth for tabling this important topic for discussion this afternoon and for speaking with such eloquence on it. I think the examples he gave were very powerful, and I think make the case very strongly for the need to do more in this important area for the sake of all of our children and indeed many adults who suffer problems and issues as a result of images they see online as well. Let me just take this opportunity, Mr. Dowd, to assure the House and indeed the public that these are problems the government takes very seriously. And there are two programmes or two projects currently underway designed to address exactly these issues, which provide, I think, in both cases, very useful platforms for doing more in this area. And the honourable member for Bosworth has touched on both of these. The first is the online advertising programme, which, as the name implies, is designed to address content for paid-for online advertising, where some of the images that he is describing do appear. And as he said, the Advertising Standards Authority has launched a call for evidence on the 21st of October, just a month or so ago. That remains open until the 13th of January, so there are opportunities for people to make their views known about this topic. And I think it'll, hopefully the Advertising Standards Authority will be able to do more in this area in response to that call for evidence. In the coming months, the online advertising programme Consultation will be launched. And again, that will be an extremely, I think, useful vehicle into which points like these can be fed. And that will then lead into, it's likely, sort of further work or further measures being taken in the online advertising space in due course. But it's clear there is a real opportunity through the online advertising programme to do more in this area, and it's extremely timely and very welcome, given the call for evidence and given the online advertising programme Consultation in the coming months. And the honourable member has raised these issues now. He has picked his moment with a great deal of good fortune. Now, there is also, of course, not just the question of advertising, but also the question of user-generated content. And that is the scope of the Online Safety Bill, which the honourable member referred to. It was published last May, and I can see he's got a copy of the draft bill in front of him, which I can see is diligently tagged up, so I'm delighted that he's been studying it so carefully. As members will know, that is currently going through a pre-legislative scrutiny process. There's a joint committee of both the Commons and the Lords looking very carefully at it. It's chaired by our honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hyde. They've taken very extensive evidence and will be publishing a report on or before December the 10th, which may well address some of these issues. The government is certainly in listening mode on the Online Safety Bill, and we are ready to make changes and amendments and improvements to that bill where there is a case to do so. So I think there is scope for us to do more in this area. But the bill, I think, has a number of important mechanisms that I think will directly help address some of the issues that have been raised. And let me just pick up a couple of the points the honourable member raised in his remarks. So firstly, he mentioned the importance of algorithms. And as he said, this applies not just to matters of body images and the fact he has lots of pictures of well-built men appearing in his timeline, for reasons that he explained. It applies elsewhere. These algorithms do drive all kinds of content, some of which is harmful. And in fact, Francis Hagan, the Facebook whistleblower, explained how these algorithms, for purely commercial reasons, promote content that is often harmful to individuals, is often, in fact, hateful. And the algorithms do that not through any exercise of editorial judgment, but simply in order to drive user engagement and therefore drive revenue for the companies concerned. It is a purely commercial, profit-driven activity. And the honourable member made a point about transparency, and when you ask them to talk a bit more about what these algorithms do, very often the companies refuse to disclose what is going on. And therefore, some of the most important measures in the Online Safety Bill are to do with transparency. There is a transparency duty on the Category 1 companies, the largest companies, to be transparent about what is going on. And there are very powerful information rights for Ofcom, where Ofcom can require the companies concerned to provide information about a whole range of things, but including algorithms, and the companies will have to provide to Ofcom that information, providing the transparency which is currently so woefully lacking. And if they fail to meet that duty, either the transparency duty or in the case, or the information duty, responding to an information request, they can be fined up to 10% of their global revenue. And in the case of the information disclosure duties, not only can the company be punished by way of extremely large fine, but also there will be personal criminal liability for named executives. So I think there'll be a big change in the transparency around algorithms and the way that information gets provided. Now, he also mentioned, in the context of the Online Safety Bill, content that is legal but harmful. And there is clearly a strong case to say that material which causes either young people or indeed adults to develop anxiety about their own body image, can potentially be harmful. Once we pass this bill, the Ofcom consultation process will run to define what the priority harms are, the harms where Category 1 companies have to take particular care, and indeed lay out in their terms and conditions how they will address issues with priority harms. So I think there is a mechanism through which representations can be made. The argument can be made that matters concerning body image, ought to be included. Yes.
I'm very grateful for the answers that are coming back are comprehensive, and indeed on that secondary point, will that be coming back to the House of Commons to determine those priorities, or is that something that the government will set out after a consultation that will be delivered straight to Ofcom for them to make their judgment?
So there will be an extensive consultation run by Ofcom, both on the matters considered to be priority harms and on the codes of practice that go alongside those. Those will, at the bill as drafted, we'll see those codes of practice and lists of harms come back to the Secretary of State, and there is then a parliamentary procedure. So Parliament will have an opportunity to look at those list of priority harms and also the codes of conduct, to be sure that Parliament is happy with those. There are various debates currently going on about whether the mechanisms to do that can be fine-tuned in some way. But it doesn't just disappear into a void with no further interaction with Parliament at all. So clearly, in providing evidence to Ofcom, there will be an opportunity for the member and people who are campaigning with such passion on this issue to make representations. Of course.
I join the Minister in congratulating our honourable friend in introducing this debate so eloquently. Can I just take the Minister back a moment to advertising? I spent many years in British advertising agencies in London. And if you were to... I have to say, I was a little bit concerned about the advertising ban only over the last couple of days in the Health and Care Bill. We have a world-leading industry. And I would just gently say to the honourable member, to the Minister as well, that if you start trying to label advertising in this way, and I'm talking more about the traditional media here than online, that either the health warning is so small that no one notices it, or it's large enough to have a lot of notice, but at which point, certainly the larger advertising agencies will make sure that they do shoots so that they get what they want without any retouching. So I just do urge the Minister to be very cautious, and in particular to protect our world-leading advertising industry, which actually sets higher standards than virtually anywhere else in the world.
Well, look, I thank my honourable friend, the member for Woking, for his intervention, particularly given it's built on years of expertise in the industry, as he said. Of course, these are issues that require careful thought. There are balances to strike, and we don't want to obviously cause issues to the advertising industry that are unreasonable. In just a moment, and that is why the government is looking at this, and the various regulatory authorities are looking at this in such a careful way, with the call for evidence that's running at the moment, the consultations that will go on in the coming months on the online advertising programme, and the consultation on the priority harms and the codes of conduct, which Ofcom will conduct in relation to the online safety bill. And through those consultations, there will be an opportunity clearly for campaigners to put forward their point of view in relation to body image. Obviously, the advertising industry will have very extensive opportunities to put their case, and there'll be opportunities for regulators and indeed for Parliament to think about how that balance can most appropriately be struck. But we do fully recognise, as with so many areas, that there is a balance to strike in making sure that we reach the right solution. Happy to give way.
Thank you very much, Minister. And absolutely, I would agree on the striking that balance. And to address, if I may, the intervention made, absolutely, my hope would be that you'd never actually see a label on these images, because companies are socially responsible in choosing not to doctor those images. However, should those images be doctored for any reason, having that label there, that small p, small b, whatever it happens to be, alerts the user to the fact when they're scrolling through hundreds of images, particularly on social media, that all is not as it seems. And I think that is a fair balance.
Okay, well, I thank the member for his intervention, and I think his comment was probably directed as much at the member for Woking as it was towards me. Clearly, there are some important points to debate here. But Mr. Dowd, in conclusion, the government does take this issue extremely seriously, not just in the DCMS, but across government, whether it's the Department of Health and other departments as well. We do recognise that there is potentially serious psychological harm being caused, particularly to young people, but more widely as well in this area. We do want to make sure that reasonable steps are taken to avoid harm being inflicted. And I hope that members across the House, with opinions on both sides of the argument, fully engage with the consultation that will run in the coming months around the online advertising programme, will fully engage with the call for evidence the Advertising Standards Authority currently has out, and will fully engage with Ofcom when, after the bill passes, they consult on the priority harms and the codes of conduct. I think some extremely important issues and arguments on both sides have been surfaced in today's debate, and I'm sure we're looking forward very much to debating these further in the coming months to make sure that we strike that balance we just discussed between protecting people who need to be protected so that the internet isn't just an ungoverned, lawless space where anything goes. We don't want to see that continuing, but equally we need to make sure that industries like the advertising industry are not unduly penalised or circumscribed. I'm confident that this House, on a cross-party basis, can apply its collective wisdom and strike that balance, and I look forward, Mr Dowd, to working with colleagues to do just that in the coming months.
Thank you. The question is that this House has considered government action on body image in the media and online. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.